Welcome. After a 12-year battle, age restrictions on emergency contraception will soon be lifted for girls under 17. A federal court judge has ordered that Plan B, also known as the morning after pill, be made available to women of all ages over the counter, OTC, without a prescription. So, should parents worry more? No more than usual, says a new study. Young adolescent sexual activity is greatly exaggerated. We'll examine the data in a moment. But also on tonight's program, making affordable space for artists to dance and draw in New York City. A documentary highlights the problem of gentrification. A nonprofit provides a solution. Then a preview of the Tribeca Film Festival. Don't miss these trailers we will show you, whose themes range from trying to resist a passionate Paris romance to bending steel with your bare hands. Two things that may be equally difficult. First, our regular segment, Public Intellectual, where we present new research that matters to public policy and everyday life. Today's relates to that Plan B court decision. A new study of young people's sexual behavior is about to be published in the May edition of the journal Pediatrics. It shows that some of us harbor myths that need breaking. The lead author, Lawrence B. Feiner of the Guttmacher Institute, joins us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So first, what do people think in public opinion that teenage sexual activity is like in the United States?
There exists a misperception that young adolescents are very sexually active. About 2/5 of Americans think that most 14-year-olds are having sex, for example. But when we looked at the data, we found that that wasn't actually the case. And if you take a look at our information.
So let's do that. In
Great.
fact, right now we're going to put up a graphic. This is a chart from your study results. Tell us what we're looking at.
So basically what we see is that among both females and males, the proportion of 10, 11, and 12-year-olds who have had sex is minuscule. And even among 13 and 14-year-olds, it's quite small. Among 15 and 16-year-olds, a more substantial proportion, but still a minority, have had sex. And
not just a minority, but under 20%
right.
for the 15-year-olds and a little above 20, maybe 25% for 16-year-olds.
Right. By their 16th birthday, only about a quarter have had sex. And that's the group that was most affected by the recent decision to put Plan B over the counter for all ages.
Because the decision was, remind us?
The decision was a validation of the FDA's original decision to take this action, to put the emergency contraceptive pill over the counter. The Obama administration and Secretary Sebelius had overruled that FDA decision and decided that the current situation should continue to hold, which is that only 17-year-olds and older should have access to the method over the counter.
So we're seeing that sexual activity is pretty unusual among girls under 17, and so this
Yes.
doesn't affect that many people. However, if we're talking about around 20% of 16-year-olds, that's still a lot of kids.
It is, and that's the group that's most affected, because the argument that was being made by Secretary Sebelius was a misplaced argument. The focus was on 10 and 11-year-olds in their argument. But really, 10 and 11-year-olds are not the group that is sexually active. If you look at 15 and 16-year-olds...
You mean it was an emotional argument? It was, should a 10-year-old be able to go up to a drugstore and get a morning after birth control pill without their parents knowing about it?
Right, but this is really not what that's about. This is about 15 and 16-year-olds who are the group that was most affected by the decision, and so who will benefit the most from the removal of the restriction. But I think it's also important to point out that people of all ages will benefit from the decision, because the method is going from behind the counter to over the counter. So even those who are 17 and older will have better access to the method, because there won't be a pharmacist or other figure from whom they will have to obtain the method.
So let's go back to the study results. You distinguish between older and younger adolescent sexual activity. That's what you were just describing. But how do you define sexual activity in your study?
So in this study, we used government data from the National Survey of Family Growth, which is arguably the best U.S. source of information about sexual activity, contraceptive use, and so on. And we defined sexual activity as ever having had sex. So if a person reported their age at first sex, that was the indication for us of whether or not the person was sexually active, or I should say ever sexually active.
Sex meaning genital to genital intercourse.
Meaning vaginal sex, penile vaginal sex,
yes. Now, for the youngest kids, is there an indication that whatever sex they are having is coercive? It's some adult forcing them into an activity?
We do have some data on that. And again, the percentage of young adolescents who have ever had sex is very small. It's less than 1% of these 10 and 11-year-olds. But among this very small percentage, the probability that that sex is non-consensual or forced is much higher. The majority of cases, in fact, are non-consensual.
So they would have to have access on their own, this very small group, because of presumably an adult in their life, and sometimes it's going to be adults in their own home, are raping them, in effect, then they're not going to be able to go to those people for the permission.
That's right.
Not comfortably.
Most likely, yes. But the same case might apply for an adolescent of any age who had become sexually active. Some might be uncomfortable doing that, and so that's why the decision is so important.
So the study also looked at the rate of contraceptive use among younger and older adolescents. What did you find there?
Well, we found that contraceptive use among adolescents starting at about 15 or 16 is actually pretty comprehensive. About 80% of 15-year-olds use birth control the first time they have sex. And that is very similar to the proportion of older teens who start having sex. But the proportions of younger teens, 14, 13-year-olds, who use contraception the first time they have sex was actually lower. So there's a distinction point that we found.
How do you explain it?
Well, I think part of it is access to information. Part of it is access to methods, because there may be some cases where adolescents don't have access to services that they need, and there may be cases where, of course, as you just discussed, that sex is coerced. And in those instances, use of birth control is less likely.
I wonder if we have that chart that we could put up again. If we do, I want to show everybody something else on it, and here it is. And actually, it's the same chart we were looking at, as I said. And my question is, just as people get a little bit more time to digest this and seeing what the sexual activity rate is at different ages in the teens and up to 20, how different would this same chart have looked, say, 20 years ago, 1993, 40 years ago, 1973, even in what we presume is the innocent post-war age, 60 years ago, 1953?
Not that different, actually. The chart would be pretty similar. About 20 years ago, in fact, some of these percentages might be higher.
Really?
In the last 20 years, we've seen declines in the proportion of teens who have become sexually active. And that has been accompanied by increases in use of birth control as well. And those are two of the factors that have contributed quite a bit to the major decline in teen pregnancy that we've seen since the early 1990s.
And this was just in the news recently in New York, a decline in teen pregnancy during the Bloomberg years.
Yes.
That's been significant. Is the same true nationally?
Yes, that decline echoes the national decline. And that decline's been going on since about 1990 or 1991. So it's been quite a prolonged decline that we've been seeing over that time period.
And the mayor can't take unique, I'm the public health mayor, credit for it, it sounds like, either.
Well, the mayor has been supportive of public health policy, certainly, but we are really looking at a broader trend, a nationwide trend.
Do you think these data are reliable? Because if you're asking teenagers to report their own sexual activity, well, you can't even ask adults to report their own sexual activity and think you're going to get a straight answer all the time.
Yes, but this is actually one of the most salient events in people's lives. And this was asked in the context of a survey that talks quite a bit about sexual activity, use of birth control, childbearing, and so on. So in that context, we believe the numbers to be pretty accurate.
Did you ask about Plan B in particular?
The survey did ask about Plan B, but the proportion of women who were using Plan B at any point in time wasn't the focus of the study. Really, the focus was the proportion who were using any form of contraception when they first had sex, and that could include modern methods like the pill, the implant, the injectable, as well as more traditional methods like the rhythm method, for example.
So how do you think parents should take the combination of the court decision and your findings about teenage behavior? Do you think there's an implication, for example, from the court decision for how teens will behave with respect to contraception?
Well, emergency contraception is just one piece of a broader contraceptive strategy that people make use of. So in terms of giving teens information that they need, emergency contraception is one part of that puzzle, but really it has to be accompanied by a broader discussion of sexuality, sexual activity, and the range of contraceptive methods. Because even if kids aren't yet sexually active, they will become sexually active. Virtually all Americans do. And so it's essential that kids have the information that they need to protect themselves if and when they do become sexually active.
And we should say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Plan B is much less effective than contraception used before sex. You're kind of playing roulette if you're waiting until afterwards and thinking that taking Plan B is going to be, give you the same percentage of protection as if you use a condom or some other method.
That's true. And most teens don't use Plan B as their main contraceptive strategy. And clearly it's an indication that somebody needs to be thinking about a more effective and a longer-term form of contraception. But it is the case that the sooner after sex it's used, the more effective it is. And that's another argument for over-the-counter access, which would be likely to improve its effectiveness.
So at what age do you think teens should be made aware of contraceptive methods?
Well, there is age-appropriate sexuality education for teens and adolescents of all ages. I think that, in general, I would leave that to the sex educators to determine what's appropriate for kids of each age. But it's certainly the case that at just about any age there is information about sex or about health or about your body that is appropriate.
Anything else from this study that I didn't ask you about that you think is interesting to report?
Well, I think it's impressive that in the Plan B decision, the judge validated the FDA's original decision and basically made it clear that the focus should be on science, the focus should be on the evidence. And the evidence clearly shows that young people can make use of birth control, they can make use of emergency contraception, they can use it safely and effectively, and that from a scientific perspective it makes sense for the method to be available over the counter. The judge recognized that. But
we should say the Obama administration is deciding whether to appeal this ruling.
They are deciding now, and we'll see how that plays out. It's a little unclear at this point.
Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your data.
Thank you so much.
Up next, a filmmaker shoots her own gentrification disaster. Gentrification. If you live in New York City, you may have experienced it firsthand. In the past decade, Williamsburg was perhaps the foremost example of what can happen, good and bad, to an established neighborhood when the floodgates open wide to developers. Such whirlwinds affect old neighbors and artists as well, artists who ironically are often the pioneers fleeing high rents in the last neighborhood they made cool. Our next guest, avant-garde filmmaker Su Friedrich, documented her experience as an artist living in Williamsburg in her latest film, Renovation.
In 1989, my girlfriend and her ex-girlfriend fell in love with a beautiful, dilapidated loft in Williamsburg. They started renovating it, and, with mixed feelings, I joined them. It was originally the Hecla Ironworks building, built at the turn of the century. I mean, the other century. They made decorative wrought iron pieces for many buildings in New York, like Carnegie Hall, the New York Stock Exchange, Saks Fifth Avenue, and the Waldorf Astoria. Lots of artists were moving into industrial spaces in Williamsburg. Most were renters, and they renovated the spaces at their own expense, just as we did. Our landlord gave us 2 space heaters and installed a water pipe to the bathroom. We, on the other hand, emptied our bank accounts and put in 8 months' hard labor, scraping the ceiling, stripping the old linoleum, building a kitchen, bathroom, bedrooms, studios, and, eventually, a garden. The landlord told us at the outset that we could live there, but he gave us a commercial lease, and the city turned a blind eye. This was common practice at the time.
Filmmaker Su Friedrich joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Then what happened?
Then what happened? Well, for the first 10 or 15 years, things were more or less okay, and then there was the rezoning in May of 2005, which changed everything.
Rezoning, perpetrated by the Bloomberg administration, correct?
Yes.
And what did they rezone and how? What changed?
Well, just to backtrack a little bit, the community, meaning the older residents, Polish, Hispanic, Italian, and the artist, worked for years to create a community plan, which is called the Williamsburg Waterfront Plan. And the City Council passed it in 2002. And then the Bloomberg administration and the City Planning Office just threw it out the window and put in the 2005 rezoning. And so most of the ideas in the community's plan were scuttled when they made the actual rezoning. And so what was the rest of your question? And then what happened? What happened is that by the next day, the developers moved in. It really was astonishing, the speed of it. And at the time of the rezoning, 70% of the available land in Williamsburg for development was owned by 5 developers. So there was a lot of forethought about this.
And so we return to the film, and we will see Sue counting the new buildings that are springing up on a map of the neighborhood, and then making an appointment to see one.
28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. Hi, Wendy. My name is Su Friedrich. I got an email from you to call you about coming to this thing. Well, I mean, on the site I filled out the studio, although it could be a 1-bedroom. Yeah. I mean, basically, I just want to come and see what the spaces are like. I live on North 11th. Okay, it's F as in Frank, R, I.
All right. Did they know you were making a film when they let you into that open house, I guess, with your camera?
They didn't, and I discovered that now with the ubiquity of media and everybody's got a camera or a phone, people don't really notice cameras or they don't register them. So I said I had the camera so that I could bring footage home to my partner because we were looking together. So I could kind of create an excuse for having the camera.
And they're so small and innocuous these days. It's not like the crew is coming in with cables straight behind them, right?
Right.
And when was that? That particular scene?
That was 2007, probably. So it was pretty early on. It was one of the first that was finished and had a big party. And actually, their party became kind of famous for being so extravagant. They weren't usually like quite that extravagant.
And the scene just before that, where you were counting numbers on a map, that was what exactly?
Well, when I went around to film, I took my camera and I took that map and I marked every place I filmed in red. And then when I was editing, I was trying to make it possible for the viewer to understand the geography because it's, you know, it's very complicated. And I had a different plan, and then I realized one day that the map would work really well, and I could basically count my way through 173 sites. So it's interspersed throughout the film, this map.
And we'll show 2 more clips of the film yet. But is this bad? Is it bad that that building was going up, that any number of buildings were going up? People want to live in your neighborhood. The market would bear it. Is it bad?
I think so, yes. As you say, you know, everyone who lives in New York cares about real estate. We experience neighborhoods changing all the time, and part of it is, I wouldn't say entirely organic or natural. I mean, there are times when a neighborhood goes through that kind of change, and it definitely puts pressure on the lower income residents, and sometimes they're forced out. But the Williamsburg situation was really particular because it was really from the top down. And I think when you have the city deciding that this should happen and then letting so many developers come in and create such expensive housing, it really does destroy the neighborhood that had existed.
And we're going to see some examples of that in the next 2 clips that we're going to play from the film. In this one, Sue talks to a local car mechanic named Harry.
This here gonna tear down too.
When?
I know, maybe 2 months or 3 months I gotta move from here.
In 2 or 3 months?
And I'm
are
trying
you
to get
going?
something in the neighborhood, but I still have the same phone number.
How long have you been here?
26 years.
26 years?
Right in this building. And it just comes sudden like that. They gave me 1 month to move out. This was September, Labor Day weekend. Then the new landlord tell me, people are going in. Well, assuming he's the new landlord. I don't know what's going on. But in the meantime, every day I'm checking around, finding out from people. So that's what's going on. The 20 year, this is why they're rushing everything. They got to finish pulling down and leave the empty spot.
So you're just juxtaposing two things there. One, him being given such a short amount of time to move out after being there for 26 years. And the tax break. Talk more about the tax break.
Well, I think the Bloomberg felt that the developers would only build what they were going to build if they got a tax break. He wanted to give them incentives, and they set a date for it, and so there was a lot of really rapid tearing down so they could get sort of spade in the ground in time for it. And in some cases that meant that then the property was left empty because people then didn't have the money to build. But in the end it meant that all these very expensive places were being built and people were getting huge tax breaks for it. And the city is losing something like $1 billion a year in tax revenue. And it's very hard, I think, for the ordinary homeowner in the 5 boroughs who pays real estate taxes to understand why these people are getting these tax breaks. I think it's a little bit of the trickle-down theory, like, well, if we give tax breaks to these very rich people, they're going to come in and spend a lot of money and make the city wealthier. And it doesn't really work that way, in my estimation.
Or they might argue there's a chronic housing shortage in New York City, which push rents up and housing prices up all over the place. If they build more units and more units and more units, even if in this case mostly at the high end, it creates just more units in New York City, which might push prices overall down. Do you buy it?
No. No, and we have a real crisis of affordable housing in the city. So, you know, a lot of things that are being built are ruining areas which had affordable housing, and so the people who still need access to affordable housing don't have it. And a lot of the claims of affordable housing here, and similarly in Atlantic Yards, hasn't come through. You know, they're not building the amount that they say they will. Like with the new Domino plan, they were promising huge numbers of
The old Domino Sugar Factory.
Yeah, and every time a new version of the plan is presented, there's less affordable housing. So,
by the way, where will all these new residents get their cars fixed?
How will they get to the city? I mean, if you've seen the Domino plan and then the Park Towers plan on Newtown Creek, you have the high-rises I show in the film. Then you have there's a 55-story building going up next to Domino and 2 others that are very tall. And then 10 at the Newtown Creek. How are all those people going to get to the city to work? There's no infrastructure to support that population.
And there is one more clip from the film that I do want to show. Let's see if we have this ready. And this is you talking to another beloved neighborhood merchant, Peter the Butcher.
Are you retiring or you?
No, I'm still too young to retire. So
You are, yeah. Maybe work for the other butcher?
No. The other butcher gonna go gone too. It's gonna be gone soon.
Why, the rent's too high?
No, the license expired and the people doesn't want them.
Oh, that's terrible.
There's gonna be no butcher here, no more.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It was one of the special things.
I'm here from 1969.
Oh
I'm here
my
in that store.
Oh.
The new generation doesn't know what's good. They don't cook. They don't do nothing, you know. So
It's terrible. I'm so sorry. We really miss you.
all right, thank you.
What?
Well, I hope the new place keeps these.
You can't find anyone like this.
No.
This is maybe like 75 years old.
Yeah.
This is made custom. You see the walking guys' backs match to the walls. See?
Right. Yeah, it's a great place.
All right. People aren't cooking anymore anyway, he said. That's a big change in America that goes beyond
Yeah.
gentrification in Williamsburg.
Very true.
Now the punchline. You moved to Bed-Stuy. Are you a gentrifier?
Well, yes and no. I moved to a house of a man who was retiring and moving back to South Carolina. And so in that case, I think I, like millions of people before me, bought a house that someone wanted to sell. And it's sort of like when we moved into Williamsburg, we moved into an abandoned building. So I feel like I didn't displace anybody in Williamsburg, and I didn't displace anybody in Bed-Stuy. But there's a lot of debate in Bed-Stuy about what it means that new populations, i.e. whites, are moving into what has been a black neighborhood for the last 50 years. And I feel like it's important to be a part of that discussion, not to assume that I'm doing something wrong, but also not to assume that it's not complicated. And from the day we moved in, we were very busy talking with our neighbors about that. I don't shy from those kinds of things. So,
and does the fact that you're an artist play into this conversation, or that a number of people moving in are artists looking for affordable rents in New York?
well, yes and no. Because I don't know that everybody who's moving into Bed-Stuy now is an artist, because the spaces in Bed-Stuy don't lend themselves to live work for artists the way that Williamsburg did. So a lot of people are instead have been moving for a long time to Bushwick because of that.
So let's bring in another guest, Wendy Holmes, who doesn't believe gentrification has to unfold this way. She works for Art Space, an organization helping to create sustainable and affordable space for artists before they get gentrified out. And they are doing it nationwide. They call it creative placemaking. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
What does that term mean, creative placemaking?
You know, creative placemaking has a lot of definitions, but we like to look at it more holistically, looking about what are all the healthy components needed to make an area interesting, retain its affordability, be dynamic and vibrant. And so there's a lot of interpretation there. And what Art Space was founded to do was to help stop that cycle of gentrification by owning these properties in perpetuity and keeping them affordable for the creative people that they were originally intended to help.
How do you get involved with a community? What's your approach?
Most of the time we are invited by communities because of one of several factors. In New York City, we were invited by both a neighborhood group and the Warhol Foundation kind of simultaneously. And it was because of the affordability or lack or dearth of affordability in New York City that the Warhol Foundation was concerned about that issue. They were providing support for individual artists in other ways, but they hadn't really thought about what's keeping artists in New York City. And so we developed a partnership with them. They helped fund us for several years to go through a discovery process of meeting with different folks in New York City and different neighborhood groups to figure out where could we get a hold of a property that would be affordable enough for us to redevelop and to keep it affordable for the creative community. And we ended up in a partnership with an organization in East Harlem called El Barrio's Operation Fight Back. So in most communities, we're invited by either someone in the city, someone with a neighborhood association, or someone with an arts organization. Those are the most common reasons. And the most common reasons we're called is because people are afraid of that cycle of displacement, that it's happening rapidly, and they want to try to preserve at least some affordable space for artists. Or in smaller communities, it's often more about community revitalization and bringing in an element that seems to be missing from these smaller communities, downtown areas in particular.
So Sue, was there anything like this available in Williamsburg when all the change was starting to take place there? Had you ever heard of this or anything
Not at
like
all.
it?
I just learned about this when I showed my film at the Film Forum, and a realtor who might work with Art Space got in touch with me and said, "Oh, did you know about them?" So I was actually very interested to look online and see what their projects were, but there was nothing like that in Williamsburg. And I just want to respond to one of the things you say, which I think is really kind of the heart of it, which is how do you continue to have a neighborhood be affordable but have mixed use, you know, have something which has, you know, varying economic groups but also has some cultural component, and not have it flip over into this crazy gentrified, you know, place for the wealthy. And I think to hold on to that kind of mixture is really great, and that's what Williamsburg was, I would say, in the 90s, you know, and I wish it had held on.
You want to give that a shot, answering that question?
Sure. Well, Sue, because we've worked in a lot of different communities and over 35 years now, we've seen a lot of different reasons why some communities succeed at this and others fail. And one of my theories is that if there is a strong, dynamic neighborhood group or community development corporation that is also focused on sort of the livability and having a healthy mix in a community, that helps a lot, because we alone can't stop that cycle from happening totally. We can help it within the context of the buildings that we own and manage, but we can't help it totally. But we find that when we're working hand in hand with these community development groups who also have that as a goal, that then you see more of a healthy mixture created over time. And not every neighborhood has it at the right time.
Right.
So if you're going community to community to try to preserve affordable space for artists in particular, where do you get your funding?
So our funding for pre-development, which is the work of identifying a site, working with all the different stakeholder groups in a community, putting the funding together, all of that, our pre-development work typically comes from either cities or the private sector. So foundations, mainly foundations, sometimes individuals, was where that money comes from. And then on the capital side, many of our projects are mixed use with live work housing. Not all of them have housing, but I'll just give you that as an example. And about 60% of the equity comes from a program coming from the federal government called Low Income Housing Tax Credits. And that's a program of HUDs, and that guarantees a minimum affordability for people who are at or below 60% of area median income for 15 years. Then we guarantee affordability beyond the 15 years and look for up to 99 years of affordability. And then we also use programs like Community Development Block Grant, the Home Program, which is specifically for the housing side. We piece together different economic and community development types of resources with housing. And then on the arts side, and particularly for the non-residential components of our projects, we look for private support from the foundation community primarily. And
so since this is aimed at preserving a neighborhood and the affordable housing in it before it really gentrifies, and that gets out of control, how do you know when you have to intervene? What are those early signs in a neighborhood?
You know, we come into neighborhoods when they're in different cycles. So I think that the neighborhood that we're working in right now in New York City, East Harlem, that process of gentrification already started before we came in to the neighborhood. So the fact that we're creating affordable space and dedicating that affordable space for artists within that zip code is very, very important for the neighborhood that we're working in the context of. We would have never gotten that project off the ground had Community Board 11 and the nonprofit Community Development Corporation that we partnered with understood that we were creating this space for local artists. And by local, we mean in that neighborhood.
Yeah, and I understand that Michael Bloomberg is a significant donor, is that correct?
his foundation is.
So Bloomberg, the philanthropist, giveth, and Bloomberg, the rezoner, taketh away.
Yeah.
So,
I think he giveth a little less than he taketh away.
in your opinion,
I'm
which
not
is
going to let him off the hook with
well
this one.
reflected in the new film. Just tell people where they can see it.
It's going to be at Rerun Theater in Dumbo, which is a great place because they have a bar and a restaurant in the front and then the theater in the back, seat 60. And it's playing from April 19th to the 25th.
And people can see the website on their screen for tickets. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you also for joining us. The Tribeca Film Festival, which begins next week, is a fine example of art reviving a neighborhood. It began 12 years ago explicitly to rejuvenate Lower Manhattan after 9/11. Since then, the festival has grown meteorically, generating an estimated $750 million in economic activity by showing 1,400 films from 80 countries to 4 million viewers. Its artistic mission is to help filmmakers, especially emerging ones, to reach the broadest possible audience and to let those audiences feel the power of cinema. In a minute, we'll hear from the creative director of Tribeca, but let's begin by looking at a preview of a film to be shown this year. It's one example of many powerful personal stories in this year's lineup. Bending Steel, directed by Dave Carroll, is about New York's strongman, Chris Wonder Sheck.
This is perhaps the largest struggle of my life. Right now, there's a hook in me, and I don't know if it's real or if it's psychological, that is not giving me enough leeway to get out there, and I can't chop through the chain to get away from it. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Sheck. I'm a strong man. I want to assure you that what I'm doing is not magic. Have you ever failed in front of a group of people?
No. I've got one of my students with me. Let's hear it for Chris. Come on, Chris.
I see a fence. I wonder if I'll be able to bend one of the bars. I see gorillas in a cage. I wonder if I could bend it. I see handcuffs. I wonder if I could break them.
Got me all excited. We gotta see something. We gotta see something. Unbelievable. It's bent. It's done. You gotta see it to believe it, folks.
If a weight was on something that you love more than anything, how much strength could you develop in that life and death situation to lift that object? It's incredible. The limiting factor is the mind.
The trailer for Bending Steel, just one of many films featured at the 13th annual Tribeca Film Festival, which begins next Wednesday, April 17th, and runs until the 28th. To give us a preview of all the goings-on, we're delighted to have Geoffrey Gilmore here. He's the creative director of Tribeca Enterprises, formerly ran the Sundance Film Festival. Welcome to the show. Thank you for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Was that film representative in some way? I mean, it's hard to have a favorite child when you have 80 of them or whatever your number is.
I think nothing is by itself representative. It's always this breadth and this spectrum of it. But it was really, Tribeca is well known for showing documentaries, and it's also, I think, has a very eclectic range of documentaries. And the idea that this film kind of is showing a guy that's almost like a throwback character. He's small, and yet he's a strong man, and he bends steel in his bare hands. It was just such a cool film that we couldn't resist kind of including in the program.
Why do you show so many documentaries? Why is that a hallmark of Tribeca?
I think it's just part of what the independent filmmaking world is, but it's also, I think, one could argue that the breadth and range of documentary filmmaking is such that you have so many good stories. You have so many different kinds of films. You have personal filmmaking, you have archival work, you've got works that are, we've got a lot of profile films in the festival this year with people like Richard Pryor and Elaine Stritch and Moms Mabley and a range of different storytelling. And it's very eclectic. It's again, this kind of, I think people have this old-fashioned idea of documentary filmmaking, like it's a talking heads kind of format. And anything could be further from the truth. It's like, it's really driven now by stories almost almost in a way that you can almost guarantee that the best experience you can have at a film festival is go to a documentary, because you'll love it.
It's true. And I personally made a habit of making sure that I watch at least the 5 Oscar-nominated documentary features. And they are so personal, of course, many in first person, and it is not your old CBS Reports kind of documentary.
Boy, isn't it?
You've said that the Tribeca Film Festival is about discovery. Why use that word? And is that different from Sundance or any other festival?
I think Sundance is more market-oriented than we are. And that isn't to say that we don't have a market agenda as well. We sold a lot of different films out of the films that were, available to be purchased last year, 37 out of 60, as a matter of fact. But I think one of the things we're really interested in doing is showcasing the kinds of filmmakers that independent film was always fueled by, that aren't necessarily the most commercial. They might be. I think they could be. But that's not our agenda. We don't sit there and say that's singularly what we set out to do. And I think that every festival has, in some ways, its own identity. And we do. Discovery, innovation. I love what we're doing with different kinds of innovative storytelling this year. And very much community, and that sense of the range of different kinds of, I think, New York communities that exist, that we showcase work that people respond to.
And part of that is, I know you seek out international films. So the next trailer that we're going to see is for a film that will speak to you in any language. There's some English in this trailer, as it turns out, called Just a Sigh.
Excusez-moi, parlez-vous anglais? I'm trying to get to the Church of Saint Clotilde. Why did you come here today?
Honestly, don't know. I should go. It's better. It's the first time I've cheated on my boyfriend.
I don't think I want to know that.
Je serai pas au théâtre avant 19h30, 20h. C'était pour pas que vous vous affoliez. Pourquoi t'es encore à Paris?
Why did you follow me?
I didn't follow you. I went and found you. It's very different.
And we're talking to Geoff Gilmore, Chief Creative Officer of the Tribeca Film Festival. So that one is a love story, maybe an unconventional love story in French with English titles, a little English in it. Why that out of all the love stories that must have been submitted?
I don't know. The French do this so well. I think one of the characteristics that makes Tribeca also distinctive is the fact that we have a competition which is both American and international, which is very much part of its agenda. And the idea that you can showcase a work like Jerome Bonnell's work here, which I think kind of embodies this idea that I have of global independence. It's a world which now is more interactive than it used to be. The Europeans never used to speak to the Americans. It used to be kind of two spheres apart from each other. Now that's much less so. And this particular work, it's about an affair, and it's about a relationship, and it's about life. And I think there's this kind of philosophical kind of appeal to it under all of the romance that makes it the kind of story in filmmaking that you really like to showcase.
Do I have my numbers right that you get like 6,000 films
6,000
submitted?
submissions. We choose 89 features and about 60 shorts.
So that's about a 98% rejection rate.
It's the nature of the business right now, is there's so much production going on. Part of what Tribeca also tries to do is to use the festival as a platform for distribution, which is also part of what you're trying to do. The old days of going to a film festival just to acquire a movie and hope that it gets into the marketplace, it's fading. You need to figure out new strategies, digital strategies, working with VOD, trying to figure out how the world works. And what Tribeca's been really good at is just giving films that opportunity for visibility, that opportunity to get spoken about in any number of different press releases. But I always hate talking about the festival, and I love to stop talking about it and let people see the films, which is what they should be doing,
And they can start doing that next week.
Exactly.
But is there a panel of judges? Is it a pure meritocracy?
No,
Connections help?
This film, not Bending Steel, but this film, Just a Sigh, is part of the 12 12-film narrative competition, there's also a 12-film documentary competition. We actually showcase that in a very, I think, very highlighted way. We look at that as part of what the festival's strength is. But there's midnight section, there's the opening nights and closing night. We're doing something very special this year with both at midnight, with both those opening and closing, including, you know, ending up showing, you know, very rarely seen Marty Scorsese's, you know, kind of Bob De Niro film as a closing night, and opening up with Mistaken for Strangers. So it's a range of different work that you showcase at a festival, which is one of the things why it's so hard to kind of summarize, you know.
All right, so we'll show another trailer for a film that'll be showing at Tribeca. This one's called McConkey. Do you want to set this up for us?
You know, it's one of the many documentaries we have about extraordinary individuals in the festival, and I think it's about a guy that you wouldn't have anticipated that about. He had wanted to become a member of the U.S. ski team. He failed, and failed miserably at a certain point, and then his life evolved.
And this is kind of scary to watch, but check it out.
There he is, the man, the myth. Not a legend yet, he's too young.
I didn't know what he was going to do, but I said I'm going to enjoy watching what he does with his life because it's going to be something special.
Shane was one of those people that you couldn't ignore, you couldn't deny, whether you skied or not. Like, this dude is the man and then some.
Shane brought everyone hope. It was like a new day. It was, what can we do with it? What are we going to explore? How far can we take this?
He was the ultimate entertainer. That guy is awesome. People went to the movies to see Shane McConkey.
The mid-2000s, Shane was firing, reeling at life, dreams coming true right and left.
Why did he take that risk? He was married, had a kid.
People maybe say that he was selfish.
People like Shane, they're like me. I'm not afraid of death. I'm more afraid of not living fully.
I would never stop him from doing something he loved.
We'd gotten to this point where we needed to do what was next.
We really want to push the limits and just change the game.
Shane could have retired, and Shane could have just walked away easily.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
It wasn't his way. He's never been like that. He wasn't ever going to stop.
Oh yeah, another wingsuit ski base. Here we go.
And I have to say that trailer, which I saw just before we went on, broke my heart because of the kid.
You know, it's a film that's striking because it's about a story of a guy that wanted to be on the U.S. ski team and failed and ended up kind of sitting in a closet-like apartment at a ski resort and starting jumping off houses and skiing down cliffs and evolving into perhaps one of the most famous and influential skiers over a period of decades, who was famous not only because he took such risks, because he took that sport of extreme skiing to another level, but he literally reinvented himself and everything he did to the point where people looked at his skill set and said, this guy lacks the fear gene, but he's beyond that. He's actually accomplishing something which is just jaw-dropping.
I want to move on. Sorry, go ahead.
And there's a poignancy to it ultimately as well, and that's what that's seeing, that kind of personal element and the storytelling here. That's just, you know, it moves you.
And breathtaking scenery mixed in with a heartbreaking story of a little
guy
boy
that was
losing his father.
Jumping off cliffs and a base jumper, and ended up combining all these different sports to do something. The level of risk taking is beyond my imagination.
I want to move on from that to acknowledge that there's always a political thread at the Tribeca Film Festival. And we don't have a trailer for one of those, but maybe you can talk about the film Big Men.
It's actually the opening of our documentary film competition, Rachel Boynton's work.
Go ahead.
And it's a really interesting piece because it's about essentially the development of new oil fields and how complicated that is. And instead of taking the kind of simplistic tack that you might have taken some years ago, where you have the big Texas oil company and the hedge fund coming in to exploit the poor third world country, that it's much more complicated than that. And it gets actually much more interesting in the telling of the story. It's about Ghana, and it's about the kind of experience that the Nigerians have had in development of those oil fields and what it took to get that oil field developed in Ghana, and all of the geopolitics, and for that matter, the kind of economic issues and local political issues and personalities that drove this for people that want to be a big man, whether you're a Texas oil guy or whether or not you're essentially an entrepreneur and struggling in Africa. And she has a really deliberate, complicated point of view that actually makes it really interesting kind of analysis of what you might say is modern capitalism. A different kind of a worldview than a kind of simplistic, the bad guys are the oil company guys and these are the good guys. It's not the way the world works.
We have a still from this movie. This is a little bit of it that we could show you. I think that's up right now. But there it is. But do you look for certain kinds of political films, one with complexity or ones that you think tell a very important, lesser-known story?
I think the answer is that you're open to it instead of looking for it. I think what you try not to do is impose agendas on all those films that are given to you. You try to open up and keep a response to it. But for instance, this film, Alias Ruby Blade, which is about the East Timor Revolution, which is another extraordinary documentary in our competition, or for that matter, a couple of the other films, about the radical group, Move in Philadelphia, a number of other different stories that deal with political issues, makes that experience of it not, again, your kind of simple social issue-oriented documentary, but actually a story that both has drama to it and I think kind of ideological complexity that for the new generation that's come through, I think makes them feel like they're not being sold ideology, that they're being told stories.
Another film that caught our eye is Broken Circle Breakdown. We'll see the trailer from that. It's foreign and very American, and with subtitles, but you don't really need them.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by?
Waar ik al heel mijn leven van bezeten ben, dat is van Amerika. Van waar dat je ook zijt, je komt daartoe, je kunt gewoon opnieuw beginnen. Dat is een land van dromers.
Right, cowboy.
Het is zover. Mijn water is gebroken.
Kalm, zet kalm, jij, kalm.
Mabel! Misschien wil ik niet beslissen over het leven van iemand anders.
Jij stikt met.
He went downtown to his neighbor's door. Little miss, what do you come for me to wear? Can't even make your own corn bread. Sing good I am and will remain. Lazy man, I will maintain. You rue the day that you were born.
So what were those hillbillies doing speaking Dutch?
I know, really.
Flemish.
It's funny, the world of music culture is such a universal world. And, these guys embrace bluegrass, and it's one of the strongest elements of the film. But it's also a film that's just beautifully told. It's sexy, she's stunning. This guy, Felix van Groningen, who did this film, is a real wonderful filmmaker. And it's cut a little bit like, I describe it as kind of like a Quentin Tarantino film, where it's all flash forwards and flash backwards. And what you don't know at different points is where you are in the story. So you're actually looking at a scene and you're experiencing it, and then you realize only later on where that fits in the chronology of what's being told. And it's a film that's about tragedy, a family tragedy, but it's also a film really about a
So
relationship.
now that we've whet everybody's appetites,
It's
and we have
beautifully
60
done.
seconds left with all these trailers, is it too late? Are tickets all sold
No,
out
no,
to the whole
tickets are
festival?
absolutely available, and people should go see things. And let me make an argument to people. You know, last year we had a film come out of the festival that became an Academy Award nomination, War Witch, which won the Tribeca, competition. Go see an international film. Go see a film that you won't otherwise get a chance to see. Don't worry about seeing that American film that's just coming out, although I happen to think Rick Linklater's Before Midnight is one of the best films I've seen this year, and you should go see that too. But there's just this range and breadth to what people should try to experience. And I don't know, I can only encourage people to make choices that really showcases the kind of whole festival and all
Film
of
is
its
still
breadth.
a vibrant art form, so much so, hopefully people have the attention span for it. Thank you very much.
You're very
Congratulations
welcome.
on the festival. And that's our program for this week. Next week and the following week, special editions of the show, 2 mayoral candidate forums that I'm moderating. The first is on affordable housing, the second week, environmental sustainability. And tune into my daily radio show weekdays from 10 a.m. until noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow we continue our series on the future of recycling in New York. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.